Sir James Frazer was 5 years old when Darwin published his landmark work, The Origin of Species, in 1859. Frazer grew up in a culture in which the idea of evolution predominated, and it was all the rage to seek evolutionary explanations of different fields of knowledge so as to make them more scientific. Frazer thought that anthropology was well suited to an evolutionary explanation. His idea was that human culture, and indeed the human mind, goes through several predictable evolutionary stages of development, and this applies to all cultures worldwide. On Frazer's view, there are three distinct stages of human development: the stage of magic, of religion, and of science. Magic is the first and most primitive stage. In the earliest cultures, magic is the predominant way of thinking, and the equivalent of the role science and technology plays for our culture. Frazer defines the magical stage of thought this way: magic is nothing but a mistaken application of the very simplest and most elementary processes of the mind, namely the association of ideas by virtue of resemblance or contiguity. This is on page 52 of the Oxford World Classics edition. That is, magic represents the very simplest way of thinking. It involves noticing connections between things of two kinds. First, similarity, what Frazer calls resemblance, and second, physical proximity, what Frazer calls contiguity. The primitive thinker notices that two widely separate objects look similar, and so connects them in his mind. Or he notices that two different-looking objects are sitting next to each other, and so connects them. The laws of similarity and contact are not wholly irrational. Consider, for example, disease. Coming into contact with a diseased person does, in fact, spread disease. And in general in nature, similar things do behave the same. If wood from a maple tree burns well, so does wood from an oak tree. So far, there is nothing magical or irrational. But what makes this mode of thought magical is that the savage mind then takes this form of science and extrapolates it far beyond what can be justified. So, one form of a law of magic is that like produces like, as Frazer says on page 28. By itself, this is a reasonable principle. A medicine that cures one skin disease may well help against a different skin disease. But the savage goes too far and thinks that mere similarity is enough to give him power and control over events in the world. So when two things resemble each other, you can produce the second by manipulating the first. For example, if you want it to rain, you perform some similar action, such as taking a bucket of water and pouring it on the ground so that it resembles rain. Or, perhaps, you bang on some drums to imitate the sound of thunder. By the law of like produces like, you can make it rain. A familiar example is the idea of a voodoo doll. If you want to hurt your enemy, you make a doll that resembles him, then stick a pin in the doll. This is supposed to be an effective way of harming or even killing him. It works, according to the magical mind, because of what Frazer calls the principle of sympathetic identification. The doll looks like your enemy, so it must have some deep connection with him, and thus what happens to the doll must also happen to him. On page 28, Frazer gives a number of examples of this from around the world, and says that it is still practiced by the, quote, cunning and malignant savages, end quote, today in Australia, Africa, and Scotland. Note that this kind of language is what helps give Frazer a bad reputation today, though he does include Scotland in his list, so it is not just a matter of a racist attack on Africans and Australian Aborigines. Recall that Frazer is from Scotland himself. An example of imitative magic today is the widespread belief in Asia that powdered rhino horn is a drug to combat male impotence, the magical equivalent of Viagra. The reason is obvious. The rhino horn is an obvious phallic symbol, and the rhino itself a symbol of virility and power. The magical form of reasoning holds that since the horn looks phallic, then it must have a magical influence on male virility. Of course, this is sheer superstition, and it is also leading to the destruction of the wild rhinoceros population. So far, we have talked mostly about the principle of imitative magic, or homeopathic magic, the idea that similarity in appearance creates a magical connection between things. But there is also the second principle, the one based on contiguity, or physical connection. This can be called contagious magic. The idea is very much the same. When there is a physical connection between things, that also creates a magical connection, so that even when the two are separated, you can affect the one by doing something to the other. Let us return to the example of voodoo dolls. There is the idea that an effective voodoo doll must not only look like your enemy, but to be most effective should actually contain some physical part from your enemy. For instance, a bit of his hair, or nail clippings, or his clothing, or something like that. If so, then by harming the doll, you will be harming him. Thus, Frazer describes, on page 37, how in many cultures worldwide, people take great care to hide or destroy their nail clippings, their extracted teeth, or their hair clippings, lest these things fall into the hands of their enemies. Now, why does Frazer think that magic is a primitive stage of thought? It is because magical thinking is based on what he sees as the simplest and most primitive form of thought, that of the association of ideas. The primitive mind is not yet able to think in terms of logic or advanced notions of scientific causality. What he notices is simply similarities and physical connections. So his mind works at a very simple level. Frazer describes the governing principle of magic as a simple mistake. Homeopathic magic commits the mistake of assuming that things which resemble one another are the same. Contagious magic commits the mistake of assuming that things which have once been in contact with each other are always in contact with each other. That quotation is from page 27. Magic, Frazer says, is very much like science in that it looks for causal connections and laws in the world and believes in the regularities and laws of nature. The trouble with magic is simple. It doesn't work. Voodoo dolls don't work. Rain dances don't work. So primitive culture is stuck and cannot make any progress unless it advances past the stage of magic. So every culture will eventually leave magic behind and advance to the second stage, religion. Frazer thinks that eventually people come to realize that magic just does not work, and then they turn to religion as an alternative. Frazer defines religion as the propitiation or conciliation of powers superior to man, which are believed to direct and control the course of nature and of human life. Whether this is a good definition of religion is a point we will have to return to. For Frazer, religion is both science and technology, though of a primitive form. The science part is the belief in these powers. The technology part is the attempt to manipulate them. From this theory, Frazer develops a theory of the purpose of all religious rituals, be it sacrifices, prayers, worship, etc. An attempt to please the deity and win his favor. Again, this is a highly controversial account of ritual. For Frazer, religion involves a major step backwards from magic. For religion rejects the idea of the world being governed by impersonal regular laws of nature. In the religious worldview, the world is run by the personal whims of deities. Hence, the world is seen as elastic and variable, not as rigid and invariable as in the view of magic and of science. Religion, he thinks, is thus in fundamental antagonism to both magic and science, both of which see the world as governed by mechanical laws. What is Frazer's argument for why magic must have preceded religion? It is the idea that the notion of a personal agent governing the world is a far more sophisticated and complex notion than that of the laws of similarity and contagion. Magic follows immediately, he thinks, from elementary laws of association, but religion requires intellectual sophistication and reflection. Further, Frazer reveals his opinion about the great majority of mankind. The, quote, dull, the weak, the ignorant, and the superstitious constitute, unfortunately, the vast majority of mankind, end quote. This is from page 53. One of the great achievements of the 19th century, he says, was to discover the substantial identity of people everywhere and at all times. What they all share is a universal faith in the power of magic. The universality of this belief, as distinguished from the complex and variable nature of religious creeds, provides evidence, so Frazer thinks, that magic is a, quote, ruder and earlier phase of the human mind through which all the races of mankind have passed or are passing, on the way to religion and science. How did this transition come about? Frazer admits that we have no facts, but that does not stop him from speculating that over time the, quote, shrewder intelligences, unquote, came to realize the inefficacy of the magic performed by the majority. This, he thinks, brings about a revolution in human thought, the realization of human ignorance and weakness. Man must give up the illusion that he is in control of his destiny. His confidence being severely shaken, man must find a substitute for the magic worldview. This new religious worldview holds that, even if man isn't in control of nature, there must be some higher supernatural beings that do control the wind and weather. And thus is religion born. In this new system, man must humble and prostrate himself before these higher beings and beg for them to be merciful to him. This is the way the deeper minds develop to religion. But it is a worldview accessible only to higher intelligences, Frazer thinks, consistent with his elitism. Small minds, he says, cannot grasp great ideas. Even today, he thinks, most people still hold to the magical worldview and only conform with religion because society demands it. Frazer raises an important objection to his own theory. How could the belief in magic persist so long, given that it was so obviously wrong? His answer is this: the failure was difficult to detect, because in many, if perhaps in most cases, the desired event did actually follow, at a longer or shorter interval, the performance of the rite which was designed to bring it about. And a mind of more than common acuteness was needed to perceive that, even in these cases, the rite was not necessarily the cause of the event. A ceremony intended to make the wind blow or the rain fall, or to work the death of an enemy, will always be followed sooner or later by the occurrence it is meant to bring to pass. Finally, though this is outside the scope of Frazer's book, mankind has come to realize that religion is no more effective than magic. Praying for rain does not produce rain any more effectively than using a rain dance. Thus, the greatest minds discovered the new scientific worldview. The world is governed by impersonal natural laws, not by deities. And science brings with it technology, one far more effective than magic. By manipulating the properties of nature in accordance with these laws, we can produce the effects we desire, at least to a degree. We can seed clouds to make it rain, or even better, we can install irrigation systems so that we don't need to depend on the rain. For Frazer, this is the third and final stage of human thought. It differs completely from the previous two in the fact that, for the first time, it is actually both true and effective. Thus, we no longer need either magic or religion. For Frazer, however, the vast majority of mankind will not be able to make this transition, so magic and religion will persist among the masses for the indefinite future.